What happens when the person who held your world together is suddenly gone? Do you bury yourself in memories, or do you dare to open your heart again? This is the story of a man who lost everything and the daughter who refused to let grief swallow him whole. The day the house fell silent, it was as if the walls themselves carried the weight of loss. The scent of her perfume still lingered in corners, the familiar rhythm of her laughter echoing faintly in memory, but she was gone, and in her absence the world seemed stripped of color. He sat in the kitchen most mornings, staring at the untouched cup of tea she once prepared for him, while the daughter quietly placed her hand over his, willing her touch to bridge the emptiness neither of them knew how to fill. Grief was not just a shadow but a constant presence, and yet within it there was the seed of something unspoken between them, a bond tested by sorrow and stitched together by resilience. She saw the pain in her father's eyes, the way he avoided looking at the seat at the dinner table that remained empty. For her, the grief carried a different shape, sharp at the edges but softened by youth's instinct to carry forward. Instead of collapsing under the weight of what they had lost, she poured her energy into creating little moments of warmth, hoping they might help him remember that life, though altered, was not entirely broken. She would cook his favorite meal, even if her attempts fell short of her mother's perfection, and smile at his silence, treating it not as rejection, but as a wound in the process of healing. Loneliness threatened to consume him, yet she refused to let it. At night, when she heard the muffled sound of his sorrow in the next room, she resisted her own tears, choosing instead to hold on to memories that made her heart ache yet comforted her at once. It was in those moments of quiet endurance that she realized love does not vanish with loss, it transforms. Her mother's presence lived in their gestures, in the way they reached for each other's company without words, in the simple act of sharing a meal or sitting side by side with no conversation at all. Days blurred into weeks, and though the house was emptier, their connection deepened. She became the steady rhythm where his had faltered, offering him gentle reminders of life outside grief. She would nudge him to take walks, reminding him of the park where they once laughed as a family. When he resisted, she did not push, but returned the next day with the same quiet insistence. Slowly, his silence shifted from heavy despair to hesitant engagement, a sign that her effort was not in vain. There was no single moment of transformation, no dramatic shift, but a gradual rekindling of spirit. The laughter was soft at first, almost foreign, when she recounted stories from her school or shared a memory of her mother that made them both smile through tears. That laughter carried healing within it, teaching them that joy could coexist with sorrow, that remembering did not always have to be painful. Through her, he began to see fragments of light again. She was not just his daughter, but the anchor keeping him tethered to life, a reminder that love persists even after loss. In nurturing him, she discovered her own resilience, realizing that the strength to endure lay not in ignoring grief, but in walking through it together. And though their hearts still ached, they carried within them the promise that love, though reshaped, remained an unbreakable thread weaving them closer in the silence left behind. She began to notice the way he withdrew from the world, how the once lively man who filled the room with conversation now lingered in silence, reluctant to face the outside. Friends reached out, yet he declined invitations, offering excuses that sounded hollow even to himself. She understood that his grief was real, but she also feared what would happen if he allowed it to consume him completely. For her, the mission became clear. If he could not yet find his way forward, she would gently lead him until he could walk on his own again. It started with the simplest gestures, ones so small they might have been overlooked. She placed his old sketchbook on the table, reminding him of the evenings he once filled with drawings, a hobby long abandoned. She invited him to join her in the kitchen, not only to share meals but to create them, allowing him to remember the joy of simple rituals. When he refused, she carried on, speaking softly, telling stories, humming songs, letting her presence become a quiet encouragement. Persistence, she believed, was a language stronger than words. The shift did not happen overnight, but she saw tiny sparks return. He picked up the pencil again, one evening, sketching absent-mindedly while she read nearby. She did not praise him loudly, knowing that would make him retreat, but smiled in her heart at the sight of him touching the parts of himself that grief had hidden. In her mind, her mother would have wanted this, not for either of them to be prisoners of sorrow, but for them to find ways to carry her memory without being broken by it. Their walks became another thread of healing. She invited him to stroll through familiar streets, sometimes guiding him toward the park, where laughter once echoed between them. At first he resisted, but she walked beside him anyway, speaking of her day, her studies, her small victories, until he joined the conversation. Nature became a quiet companion, offering them both space to breathe beyond the heaviness of home. The air felt fresher, the world less hostile, and with each step, the weight he carried seemed to lift just enough for him to keep moving. The daughter understood that helping him meant more than distracting him. It meant guiding him to transform his grief into gratitude. She began to speak about her mother in a way that celebrated her life rather than mourned her death. She shared memories that made them both laugh, sometimes through tears, and encouraged him to do the same. At first his voice trembled, but soon he spoke of moments she had never heard, stories from before her birth, pieces of her mother's spirit that now belonged to both of them. Those exchanges became treasures, allowing them to keep her alive, not through sorrow, but through remembrance that warmed rather than wounded. Slowly, she noticed him taking steps of his own. He reconnected with old friends, answering calls he once ignored. He began fixing things around the house, chores he had neglected, but now approached with quiet determination. Each action, however small, was a sign that he was reclaiming parts of himself. She never claimed credit, knowing it was his courage to choose healing, but she carried pride in her heart, knowing she had helped him find that courage. Through all this, she too was changing. Supporting him taught her resilience, but also compassion on a deeper level. She learned that love is not always grand gestures. Sometimes it is the patient repetition of showing up, of offering light when someone else cannot see it. She understood that grief cannot be erased, but it can be softened when carried together. And as her father slowly began to rediscover life, she discovered a quiet joy in realizing she was not only helping him heal, but helping herself grow into someone her mother would have been proud of. He had begun to smile again, cautiously at first, as if afraid joy might betray the love he still carried for his wife. But the daughter knew healing was not betrayal, it was continuation. One evening, when an old family friend visited, she noticed the way his eyes softened during the conversation, how his voice regained a timbre she hadn't heard in months. It was not romance yet, but it was openness, a willingness to be present again. She quietly rejoiced, not because she wanted to see him replaced, but because she wanted to see him whole. The idea of love after loss felt foreign to him. He wrestled with guilt, believing that to welcome someone new meant diminishing what had been shared with his wife. The daughter saw his conflict and spoke to him with clarity. She reminded him that love is not a finite resource, that her mother's memory would never fade simply because his heart had space for another. She told him that her mother had loved him too deeply to wish him a lifetime of loneliness. Those words, though difficult, settled within him like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. In the weeks that followed, opportunities arose naturally. The friend he had reconnected with introduced him to someone kind, someone who understood grief, and did not rush him to move faster than he was ready. Their conversations were gentle, full of patience and understanding. And though he was hesitant, he found comfort in the companionship. The daughter noticed the way he came home lighter after those encounters, The way silence no longer clung so heavily to him. She asked nothing, pressed nothing, but when he chose to confide in her, she listened with an open heart, affirming that it was not wrong to feel again. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. He began to laugh more freely, to share stories without fear of breaking. When doubt crept in, when he whispered that it felt like forgetting, she countered with certainty. Remembering and loving again were not opposites, but complements. She encouraged him to see his heart not as divided, but as expanded. The lessons she offered were not only for him. They became truths for herself as well, lessons about the courage it takes to embrace change, about how love can stretch across time and memory without losing its depth. Through their conversations, their bond deepened into something unshakable. It was not just father and daughter surviving loss. It was two souls navigating the landscape of healing together. Their honesty allowed them to speak openly about fear, loneliness, and hope. When he struggled with doubt, she reminded him of the resilience she had seen in him when she was a child, and when she faltered, he reminded her that she had been his guiding light. Their relationship grew stronger, not because sorrow disappeared, but because they faced it side by side, unafraid to acknowledge its weight. When he finally allowed himself to consider the possibility of a new relationship, it was not a decision made out of desperation, but out of acceptance. He realized he wanted to live, not just survive, and to share life with someone again was not to dishonor his past, but to honor the very essence of love his wife had given him. The daughter stood by him, not only as a supporter, but as someone who celebrated his courage. She had given him the permission he could not grant himself, and in doing so, she gave him back a piece of his future. And as he stepped cautiously toward new companionship, their home shifted once more. The walls that had echoed with silence now carried laughter, warmth, and hope. It was not the same as before, nor should it have been. It was different, but it was real. And within that difference lay a profound truth. Love does not end, it transforms, carrying us forward even when we think we cannot move at all. The day came when the house no longer felt like a place frozen in memory, but alive with movement again. There was still a photograph of her mother on the mantel, still moments when her name carried tears, but the atmosphere had shifted from heavy silence to one of balance. The father had taken a brave step forward, choosing not to replace what he had lost, but to welcome something new alongside it. His daughter observed this with quiet pride, knowing that her steady encouragement had helped him reclaim a life he once thought was over. He walked with more purpose now, his shoulders less weighed down, his laughter fuller, his voice steady when he spoke of tomorrow. The daughter recognized that grief had not vanished. It never truly does, but it had transformed into a softer presence, a reminder that love's influence is never erased by time. Instead of carrying grief like a chain, he carried it like a story, one that honored the past while allowing space for a future. For her, this was the most powerful lesson of all, that healing is not about forgetting, but about weaving together what was, what is, and what will be. When he introduced the woman who had brought light back into his days, the daughter felt no jealousy, no resentment. Instead, she welcomed her with open arms because she understood that the heart expands when given permission. She watched her father's face as he spoke, the way his eyes glimmered with a mixture of nerves and hope, and she felt only gratitude. Gratitude that he had been brave enough to love again, gratitude that her mother's memory remained a blessing guiding them both, and gratitude that she had walked alongside him through every step of the journey. The new bond did not erase the old. Family dinners included memories of the mother, stories shared with laughter rather than sorrow, and even the new companion honored her place in their lives. The daughter found comfort in this harmony, recognizing that love is not bound to one person, one time, or one form. It flows like a river, shaping itself around every rock and bend, yet never ceasing to move forward. As she reflected on the journey, she realized how much she had changed too. In helping her father rediscover love, she had grown into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She learned that loss could refine rather than destroy, that the human spirit is resilient beyond measure, and that love's capacity is far greater than she had ever imagined. Her mother's absence had left an ache that would always remain, but it had also left her with a profound understanding that love multiplies when shared, and that every ending holds the seed of a new beginning. Together, they entered this new chapter not as people who had left the past behind, but as people who carried it forward with grace. The father, once broken by grief, now lived with renewed purpose. The daughter, once fearful of losing him to sorrow, now saw him embrace life with courage. And the memory of the mother, far from fading, lived on in every gesture of kindness, every shared laugh, every moment of love that continued to grow within their home. Their story was not about replacing what was lost, but about proving that love is infinite, able to stretch across absence and time, able to hold both sorrow and joy in the same embrace. In that realization, both father and daughter found peace, not in forgetting, but in living fully, honoring the past while opening themselves to the beauty of what still lay ahead.